Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today, a really focused sprint through some key pharmacology. We're diving into chapter 9 of Lilley's Pharmacology, all about vitamins and minerals. We want to nail the core mechanisms, those crucial toxicity alerts, and the absolutely vital nursing considerations. Think of this as your fast track to understanding why these things, often just called supplements, are actually pretty potent agents.
Yeah, that shift in perspective is so important. We really have to start with the basics, the definitions.
Yeah.
Because knowing the difference, well, it tells you a lot about the risks involved in clinical practice. We're looking at two main groups here. Vitamins, they're organic compounds, carbon-based molecules the body needs.
Organic compounds, right? And minerals.
Minerals are the inorganic elements,
Mhm.
simple, naturally occurring things found in the earth, not carbon-based like vitamins.
Okay, but they sort of share a job description, don't they? Like keeping the cell's machinery running.
They're more like the keys that start the engines. Their big job, their really critical function, is acting as coenzymes or cofactors.
Mhm.
A coenzyme is basically a non-protein helper molecule. It binds to a protein.
And makes it work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Turns it into an active enzyme. Without that coenzyme, the protein molecule just sits there, inactive.
Okay, let's use an example from the text, like the body's energy production, the citric acid cycle. That needs coenzyme A, right?
Precisely. A perfect example. And coenzyme A absolutely requires vitamin B5, that's pantothenic acid. The coenzyme itself can't function without the vitamin part. The enzyme is the specialized protein doing the work. But the vitamin, as part of the coenzyme, well, it flips the switch.
Okay, so these things are basically running the show. What causes problems then? Deficiency or getting too much? The source mentions a few big reasons, bad diet, obviously. But pharmacologically speaking, GI malabsorption seems key, like celiac or Crohn's.
Yeah, absolutely. If the gut can't absorb them, intake doesn't matter. And also, significant physiological stress. Think extensive burns, metabolic demand just skyrockets.
Yeah.
Or chronic alcohol use disorder. That's notorious for causing severe deficiencies like Wernicke's encephalopathy with thiamine.
Right. And this balance issue brings us straight to that major classification. Fat-soluble versus water-soluble vitamins. This seems critical for risk.
It's the first big takeaway for you. Fat solubles are A, D, E, and K. The key thing, they aren't easily fleshed out. They get stored, mostly in the liver and fat tissue. And because they're stored, you can actually accumulate too much over time. That's hypervitaminosis. Big risk there.
Okay, stored equals risk and water-soluble.
That's the B-complex vitamins and vitamin C. They dissolve in water, get easily excreted in urine. So you need them pretty much daily, but toxicity is much, much rarer.
All right, let's dive into those fat-soluble 4 then, where that storage risk is highest. This is where it gets particularly interesting. Vitamin A, retinol.
Vitamin A is crucial for skin, bones, mucous membranes, but yeah, its most famous role is definitely vision. It's a core component of rhodopsin. That's the pigment in the retina you need for night vision.
Which explains why deficiency shows up as night blindness. Or, much worse, that corneal softening keratomalacia. Now, the massive warning sign here, high doses during early pregnancy, like the first 2 months, highly teratogenic, that's a huge red flag.
Huge. And toxicity, especially if kids get into supplements, it can look like serious neurological issues. Too much vitamin A can actually increase intracranial pressure, so you might see headaches, visual changes, or in babies, those bulging fontanelles.
Wow, that makes assessment tricky. Bulging fontanelles usually scream emergency, like a bleed, but a vitamin could cause it.
It just shows how powerful these are. Okay, next up, vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. Its job is managing calcium and phosphorus absorption use, essential for healthy bones.
And the body has to activate it, right? It starts as a D2 or D3, then needs the liver, and finally the kidney converts it to the active form, calcitriol. We use it for bone softening diseases, rickets in kids, osteomalacia in adults.
Right. And because it directly boosts calcium levels, you absolutely cannot give it if someone already has high calcium, kidney stones, or poor kidney function. Makes sense, right? And toxicity symptoms are all related to that high calcium. Metallic taste, feeling weak, dry mouth, even high blood pressure.
Okay. Then there's vitamin E, the tocopherols. Sounds good on paper, powerful antioxidant, protects fats and other vitamins.
That does sound good. But this is where you really need to look at the evidence. It's marketed heavily as preventing heart disease, but major studies, like the Big H Hope trial, showed zero benefit.
Zero benefit. And I think I read that follow-up data was even worse, like a higher risk of heart failure for some people taking it.
Exactly. That really shifts it from harmless supplement into drug with potential risks. You have to weigh that.
Definitely. Okay, last of the fat solubles, vitamin K phytonadione. Its role is in blood clotting.
Yep. It's essential for the liver to synthesize four key clotting factors: 2, C7, IX, and X. Absolutely vital.
Which leads directly to its main clinical use, reversing warfarin, right? When someone's anticoagulation is too high.
That's the life-saving use. But, and this is a huge, but stressed in the text, giving vitamin K means the patient won't respond to warfarin for about a week afterwards.
Yeah.
So you fix the bleed, but your main anticoagulation strategy is paused. Big clinical judgment call.
Yeah, that's a serious trade-off. And there's a nursing alert for IV use, too. Anaphylaxis risk.
Rare, but serious. Severe reactions have happened. That's why it needs to be diluted properly and infused really slowly, like over 30 to 60 minutes. No pushing vitamin K IV. Okay, let's switch gears. Water-soluble now, B-complex and vitamin C. Less toxicity risk, but you need them regularly.
Starting with B1, thymine, deficiency causes beriberi, or Blinky's encephalopathy, often linked to alcohol use disorder. It's key for carb metabolism and nerves.
Right. Then B2, riboflavin. Deficiency. That leads to chylosis, the chapped, cracked lips. It's generally considered very safe. High doses might turn urine a bright yellowish-orange, but it's totally harmless. Just good to know so you can tell patients.
Good heads up. Okay, B3 is niacin. Deficiency here causes pellagra. That's the 3Ds, right? Dermatitis, diarrhea, and dementia or psychotic disorders.
Exactly. And niacin's interesting because it has this dual role. Small amounts for nutrition, but much, much larger doses are used pharmacologically as an antilipemic to treat high cholesterol and lipids.
Ah, the big dose explains the side effects then, flushing and itching.
Very common. Flushing, itching. The text does say it usually gets better as the body adapts, thankfully.
Okay. Next, B6, pyridoxine. Important for using protein, carbs, fats, and making neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA.
Yes, and the key interaction to flag here. B6 can reduce the effectiveness of levodopa when levodopa is used alone for Parkinson's. Also, taking really high doses of B6 long-term isn't harmless. It can actually cause neurotoxicity, nerve damage.
Another case of more isn't always better. What about B12, cyanocobalamin?
Deficiency here is serious. Megaloblastic anemia and nerve damage that can become irreversible. And the crucial point for B12 is absorption. To absorb it from food or oral supplements, you need intrinsic factor. It's a glycoprotein made by stomach cells.
So if your stomach doesn't make intrinsic factor, maybe due to surgery or an autoimmune issue, you get pernicious anemia. And just swallowing B12 pills won't work.
Exactly. That's why for treating that type of anemia, the go-to route is usually deep intramuscular injection. Bypasses the whole GI absorption problem.
Makes sense. Okay, finally, vitamin C, ascorbic acid. Deficiency is scurvy, bleeding gums, poor wound healing.
Its job is collagen synthesis, tissue repair. It also helps you absorb iron better, and sometimes used to make urine more acidic.
But again, megadoses aren't necessarily good. Risk of kidney stones.
Yes, that's the main concern with very high doses. Can contribute to forming certain types of kidney stones, like cysteine, oxalate, or urate stones.
Okay, so we've covered the vitamins, the organic compounds. What about the minerals, the inorganic elements? These seem to pop up as high alert meds sometimes.
They certainly do. Let's start with calcium. Most abundant mineral in the body, obviously bones and teeth, but it's also critical for blood clotting. It helps convert prothrombin to thrombin, and nerve and muscle function depend on it.
Deficiency links back to vitamin D sometimes, or low intake, leads to rickets, osteomalacia, osteoporosis. And giving calcium sounds like it needs real care. Medication errors.
Huge potential for error. The text flags this strongly. Different calcium salts, carbonate, chloride, gluconate, contain very different amounts of actual elemental calcium. You have to dose based on the elemental amount. And IV calcium has to be given slowly, less than 1 milliliter per minute. Too fast causes severe hypercalcemia, dangerous heart rhythms, delirium, even coma.
Wow. Definitely a high alert infusion. And it interacts with antibiotics.
Yes, it chelates them, binds them up. Specifically tetracyclines and quinolones. If you give them together with calcium, the antibiotic basically becomes inactive, so timing is critical.
Got it. Okay, magnesium, also listed as a high alert drug.
Absolutely. It's a key intracellular cation, needed for tons of enzyme reactions, muscle contraction, nerve function. Clinically, we use it as an anticonvulsant if low magnesium is causing seizures. And, importantly, in pregnancy complications like preeclampsia or eclampsia, it acts as a tocolytic to relax the uterus, too.
High-stakes uses. So what does toxicity hypermagnesemia look like?
The classic first sign you watch for is loss of deep tendon reflexes. We call it hypophorexia. That tells you the central nervous system is getting depressed. From there, it can quickly progress to slowed breathing, respiratory distress, and even heart block.
So IV magnesium isn't just hang the bag and walk away, constant monitoring.
Constant. You're checking those reflexes, usually the patellar reflex, and counting respirations frequently. If the reflexes disappear or breathing slows way down, like below 10 breaths per minute, you stop the infusion immediately. And you need the antidote ready.
Which is?
Intravenous calcium salt, usually calcium gluconate. It directly counteracts the effects of magnesium.
Okay. And lastly, zinc, a trace element.
Yeah, trace element, but vital. Involved in lots of metabolic reactions with proteins and carbs. Its big clinical connection, though, is tissue growth and really important for wound repair. Helps wounds heal faster. Okay, this brings us to the practical side, the nursing process. How do we tie all this pharmacology into safe clinical practice? Assessment seems key for catching risks.
Definitely. What are those critical checks before giving some of these?
Well, before you give vitamin K, you absolutely need recent prothrombin time, PT, and INR results because
Okay.
it directly affects clotting. Before vitamin A, especially if deficiency is suspected, baseline vision check, specifically asking about night vision.
And for those high alert minerals, calcium and magnesium.
Baseline ECG is wise, especially with IV use, and a
Mhm.
solid neurological assessment, including grading those deep tendon reflexes, DTRs, before you even start an infusion. Get that baseline.
Right, and implementing safely. Little details matter.
For sure, like niacin. Tell the patient take it with food or milk. It really helps reduce that flushing and stomach upset. Oral calcium. Best taken 1 to 3 hours after meals. And again, IV calcium needs proper dilution and a pump, slow administration. No shortcuts.
And the magnesium safety checklist one more time, because it's so critical.
Monitor those patellar reflexes. Monitor respiratory rate frequently. If respirations drop below 10 or those reflexes become sluggish or absent, stop the infusion. Now, notify the prescriber and have that calcium gluconate right there, ready to go.
Perfect. That really wraps up our deep dive. If you had to boil it down, what are the absolute must-remember takeaways for our listeners?
I'd say two things. First, fat-soluble versus water-soluble isn't just trivia. It dictates storage, dosing, and your risk of toxicity. Huge difference. And second, minerals like calcium and magnesium. They aren't just nutrients. They're potent drugs impacting cardiac neuroclotting systems. They demand careful handling and sharp monitoring, especially IV.
Great summary, and maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Just because you can buy it over the counter doesn't mean it's harmless. Vitamins and minerals, as we've seen, are pharmacologically active. They can cause serious side effects and dangerous interactions. Treat them with the same respect you'd give any prescription medication.
Well said. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this deep dive into Chapter 9 of Lilley's Pharmacology, focusing on vitamins and minerals.
We really hope this helps you get a solid grasp on the material. Good luck with your studies, and from all of us here at the Last Minute Lecture Team, thanks for listening.